Michelle Wilson says her son Gary Presley had his life all planned out. In 2011, Presley came back to the U.S., being medically discharged in 2012 after a bad car accident. Wilson says that's when another war started at the Dublin VA.
It was just a battle with the medications, the doctors, and I watched him cry because he couldn't get the help he needed.
Struggling to receive care for pain and mental health care.
He started talking about, Mom, I don't have the fight in me anymore.
Just days later, the family learned last week Presley was going to end his life.
He told his girlfriend that he was going to do it in the parking lot so they could find his body, so that maybe somebody would pay attention to what's happening, so other vets don't have to go through this.
That clip of video you just saw is something powerful. It is from 13 WMAZ. They're the one that did the report. And the video is about 28-year-old Gary Presley, who was a military veteran who took his own life last year after being unable to receive treatment for his pain and other mental health needs. And his story is unfortunately the story of tens of thousands of military veterans. Over the last 10 years, over 68,000 military veterans have taken their own lives in their hands and ended it. The military veteran suicide crisis is extreme, and no one has hardly talked about it. And I think what people have talked about, be it on the left and the right, even with conservatives, is they frame it only as a mental health issue. These veterans, they need therapy and they need their antidepressants, when they don't come to realize that strong science and studies show that this is just as much an issue of undertreated or untreated pain. So that's what we're going to go through here in this video. Please share this on your social media. Please, please, please share this on your social media. We need to get the word out on this story. This video I'm making, I'm doing it, dedicating it to a journalist friend. I'm hoping that she sees this, and perhaps it might change her heart just a little bit. This article is what led me down this rabbit hole and why we are talking about this subject today. The mom in that story that I just shared with you of Gary Pressler, his family is now suing the Veterans Administration and the federal government over his death. They are seeking $8.25 million in damages. When she is asked why it happened, she says, quote, "Nobody listened to him. The signs were all there. He went to the VA seeking help to deal with his chronic pain he had developed from serving in the military and from a car crash. And when he went to the VA, they abruptly discontinued his opioid pain medication, which he used to manage intense chronic hip and back pain. And when he tried to fill it, and they say, no can do, sir, he lost it. The poor man lost it. And so he went into the parking lot, and he left a note in his car that said, this is what happens by punishing already suffering people. And he ended it. Sorry. His story is shocking. But unfortunately, it is the story we are hearing over and over again if you know where to look. Just in the last decade, more veterans have killed themselves by their own hands than all the deaths on the U.S. side during the Vietnam War. That is an incredible statistic. According to the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, between 2008 and 2017, more than 60,000 American military veterans took their own lives. The issue of military veterans committing suicide is getting so bad that Congress just sent money to the Veterans Administration to make sure that veterans stop committing suicide in their parking lots and in waiting areas. Think about that. It has become such a problem that the VA now has to dedicate attention to make sure suicides don't happen on the VA premises. Now, most of you probably believe that the reason for most military suicide deaths is due to undertreated mental health problems, and perhaps this is a factor. But new research has come out that suggests that actually undertreated, untreated, chronic and intractable pain could be a large factor in the reason for these suicide deaths. Research just came out this week in the BMJ. The article, the research study, is associations between stopping prescriptions for opioids, length of opioid treatment, and overdose or suicide deaths in U.S. veterans. observational evaluation. The study, which has many top research scientists on it and doctors, including Dr. Stephen Kursetz and others, looked at data from the Veterans Health Administration. They looked at 1,394,102 patients in the VA system that had an outpatient prescription for an opioid analgesic from 2013 to the end of 2014. And what they found was that the 2,887 deaths from overdose or suicide, and that these were linked, they were directly linked to the stopping of opioid treatment 57.4% of the time overall. The conclusion the study's scientists came away from this is that patients are at greater risk of death from overdose or suicide after stopping opioid treatment, with an increase in the risk the longer the patients had been treated before stopping. This means that veterans and people that are on opioid pain medications to manage their pain, if they are stopped, if they are not allowed their opioid treatment, they are at a much higher risk of hurting themselves, either from overdose or from suicide. Now, this is linked with research that came out last year. A VA study also found that there is a critical link between pain intensity and suicide attempts. Now, the Kursetz study, and Kursetz will be the first one to tell you, it doesn't prove cause and effect. We can't say for certain that if you lose your opioid pain medication, you're very likely to go commit suicide. But what it does tell us is there is an active link between these two things. That people that have undertreated pain or have pain that they deal with opioids and have their pain medication taken away, there is some link between those things and increased risk of suicide. And this seems obvious to any chronic pain patient or intractable pain patient that you might have met that have been forcibly tapered, or the horror stories of pain patients that have lost pain medication and decided to take their lives in their hand, like Gary Pressler did. Now, if you're a chronic pain patient, everything I just told you about the suicide link between undertreated pain or pain dealt with opioids and losing your medication, all that is not news to you. We are familiar in the chronic pain community with loads of horror stories on social media and elsewhere of people taking their lives or attempting to take their lives because they have been abandoned by their doctors or forcibly tapered or unable to receive the pain treatment they need. An example of this could be found here at the nationalpainreport.com with a woman named Marilyn Pittman who tells the horror story of when her sister committed suicide. And here's what she wrote. It has finally happened. My sister killed herself 2 weeks ago after 20 years being treated like an addict from her own pain doctor. He had forced her down to a very low dose of morphine. The whole family has been researching to see possibly an answer for her pain. So it was never just one issue. Her husband was taking her to the other doctor who specialized in her neck, back, and joints. No help, despite having 5 back surgeries. At least before the taper down, she could manage little trips to shop for groceries, and she did not talk about suicide all the time. When she was at home, she was in bed. Last time I saw her was Christmas Day, when she had insisted on cooking dinner. A month and 2 days later, she died in her bed. Now, I've been through it 1,000 times with you guys before, and you're probably tired of hearing about it. I mean, this one, 2000 study report in the American Journal of Psychology found that 78% of Oxycontin users seeking addiction treatment reported they had never been prescribed the drug for any medical reason. Other studies have found that only a small minority of people treated for pain, ranging from something like 1% of post-surgical patients to less than 8% of chronic pain patients, become addicted to their medication. A 2015 study of opioid-related deaths in North Carolina found just 478 fatalities among 2.2 million residents who were prescribed opioids in 2010, an annual rate of 0.022%. Now, what's happening to people in the opioid crisis, the addictions and the overdose deaths, is horrible. But you guys, by trying to use law enforcement, you wrest your way out of this problem and then deny that you're doing it, is making everything worse. Tennessee just tried to do this, where they tried to force opioid prescription cutbacks, and what happened? The rate of deaths of people dying from drug overdoses didn't decrease, it increased. Drug prohibition is largely a part of what's causing the opioid crisis. But it's also linked to the loneliness crisis. It's linked to people's lack of meaning. It's linked to lack of jobs. It's linked to the, how, the industrial Midwest has been hollowed out. It's linked to a lot of things. What it's not linked to is chronic pain patients. And we know that. That isn't an opinion, that's a fact. I have showed you some of the studies here. I've showed you the studies that show that the big part of the veteran suicide crisis is due to undertreated or untreated pain. I've shared with you the stories of chronic pain patients and their family members that committed suicide. I've shown you studies now that show that it is indisputable. Chronic pain patients are not the reason for the opioid crisis or the suicide deaths. We are not to blame for the opioid deaths, but we have become the scapegoat and we get to carry the sins of the crisis, and it's wrong. You and I both know that scapegoats are always wrong, that we should deal with problems according to what actually caused them and not what looks best or is easiest to deal with. It is a heck of a lot easier to deal with doctors and chronic pain patients than it is to deal with drug dealers and bad players coming out of Mexico and China. It is a lot easier to make the lives of chronic pain patients and military veterans who have no one to advocate and defend them than it is to actually deal with where these drugs are coming from. What is happening to chronic pain patients, what is happening to military veterans is enraging, it's horrifying, it's disgusting. We all know it's wrong. So please, if you are watching this and you're a journalist, you have a duty. You have a duty, a moral duty and imperative to report on this. Get the truth out. If you are struggling with suicidal thoughts or feelings, many of us are, I understand that problem. Get help. It's never okay to engage in suicide. Never. You need, if your mind is in that place, you need to get help. There's no shame in getting help. I know there are many advocates here on Twitter, on social media, and elsewhere that would be happy to talk to you. Or you can call the hotlines, or you can try to get help. But do something. Get help. Don't let yourself get into that darkness, because you deserve to live just as much as anyone. And we can't allow our story to be snuffed out because the people affected by it, the victims of the opioid prohibition, if they snuff themselves out, our story will never be told, and future generations will be unable to learn the lesson of the opioid prohibition. So all of us have to keep going, and we have to let this story live on. Thank you so much for your time. Your support, my audience, means the world to me. God bless all of you, and may things get better soon.